Halo, se slišme? Ok, lep pozdrav. Hvala vsem, ki ste prišli. Dober večer. So I will switch now to English. So good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Now we are going to talk about degrowth, and the title of this event is Beyond the Society Based on Growth. So I'm really grateful that we can host this discussion here that represents coherent critique of the world, the system we are living in. It is critique of capitalism, and it calls for the decolonization of the public debates. So our emphasis is here today will be on different and not only on less. So I will stop talking here and maybe just firstly introduce our first speaker, Giacomo De Alisa. He's currently based in Zagreb, well, for this week, at the Institute for Political Ecology as a senior research fellow. Otherwise, he's also a postdoc fellow at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Cumbria, and also co-founder of the research and DeGroat Barcelona, right? So he's an ecological economist and political ecologist. So Giacomo, now, if we are talking about degrowth and the economy as such, it is hard to understand the added value of the gains of degrowth, or especially when we are talking, for instance, here in Slovenian framework about the economy. It is growing now. Our economic growth is the biggest in the European Union this year. Even some economists say that we are a European tiger. Our volume of growth is 5.2% of GDP. So actually, all we are listening now is how good it is for our society. That this means new working places, new opportunities, better living, maybe even happiness. So what's wrong actually with this picture?
Okay. Good evening. Yes, I'm also Napolitan, so I come from the south of Italy, and as living in very different space for small amount of time, it's always very difficult to land in a place. I have been here in Ljubljana in 2009 for the Ecological Economics Conference, and I had a very good remembering of it. It's a very nice city, so I'm pleased to stay again here, and thanks for the invitation, Aida. Well, this invitation is, I also am happy because I will be again perhaps here to launch the book and the Slovenian translation in December. So it's a pleasure to me also to know that perhaps we will meet you again, and not just for this 2 hours discussion. So supposedly, okay, even to answer this question, and starting from, let's say, a grounding country-related question that in some way lack me on knowledge, because I don't really know about politics and the political economy of Slovenia country. What I can do is to try to understand what can be the paths that normally the growth economy countries normally face. This is a period in which Europe, generically speaking, is going over the so-called crisis, the economic crisis in 2008. Indeed, the new statistical data about growth in Europe make happy all the countries. On average, we finally reached the 2.2. That is the long-term growth rate that economists aspire to have on a long period of, let's say, data. And a part of Italy that we stay still around 1.5. I mean, all the country like Spain also is doing very well, Portugal and Germany, of course, never had a big issue about economic growth. What what is the discussion about this is that, of course, the economic growth is something that is not getting an ending, even if, I mean, many official and very mainstream economists were saying that already in 2009. So it was not just a claim of, critical economists. I mean, many proficient economists in 2009 start to speak of the era of stagnation. So they were thinking of an economy that worldwide will decrease in terms of the rate of economic growth. So, I mean, the contingency of current economic growth is also related to many aspects of that are related to the extractive economy that we are based on still. So the extraction that we normally do outside of Europe. So many of the basic materials and energy come outside of Europe, and we as a matured economy normally have economic activity that are related to added value, added value products and outcomes. So normally these represent also the fact that even if you experience contingent growth, it is because the way in which the mature economy that you are joined with, so the westernized European economy as a Slovenian, make you coming in this kind of extractive economy that normally growth, but thanks to its ability to shift the cost of their impact outside of Europe mainly. I don't know how long I have to address the issue, or I
No,
should
it's okay,
stop
it's
here,
okay.
or
It was warming up question.
okay.
So actually, I mean, you're also part of the platform research and in DeGroat. Maybe can you, because this is, let's say, more practical thing, and maybe people can relate to that as well. How did you start it? What is this about? How does it work actually? And also about the book, maybe you can also mention it. The DeGroat Vocabulary for a New Era. It's the book that you co-authored and co-edited. So maybe, and also, of course, explain please what is DeGroat, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, let's start from then my experience as founding okay. Let's start from Research and DeGroat, that I'm one of the founding members, so a little bit of grounding of how, let's say, the DeGroat movement also increased all along these last decades, and what let's say how now DeGroat is framed. I will try to do it in 5-6 minutes if it's possible. So basically, Research and DeGroat is one of the main now association or NGO or grassroots movement organization that are spreading the idea and the critique of the growth economy. How it emerged and when it basically it was at the beginning around 2000 was a movement first of all like based in France, was a movement related to a very specific issue. Many members of Research and DeGroat were in France fighting against the car in the city center. Then you have a city center without cars, so you already have a good starting point. So basically they were anti-car movement, let's say, in the city center in Lyon. Then the movements increase through a march of Francois Schneider with the donkey all around France, and then the movement increase and also shift a little bit attention to Italy and to the social movement in Italy. That is the second country, let's say, in Europe where the degrowth movement was emerging at around 2007, 2008, and then indeed, finally, there were many Italian French people in the Paris conference in 2008. Was the first scholar academic conference on degrowth. Now we are the sixth one next year in Malmo. And then from 2008, let's say that the French, the Italian, and some people in Catalonia, that is, well, you know what is it, because in these days between Catalonia and Spain, there's a lot of issue politically. Start to think to have the new conference in Barcelona, because the idea was that scholarly could be useful to join the radical position of many ecological economists. And in Barcelona there were a very important school of ecological economists whose main intellectual is Joan Martínez Salier, that wrote a very nice book on the environmentalism of the poor. He was trying to show that contrary to what normally is taught, that environmental is something that the rich people take care about. He was trying to show that worldwide there were billion of people that supposedly were poor, but that they were the real environmentalists. So these people joined in Barcelona with this idea of creating a new conference and asking the ecological economy. It was, even if marginal in academia, still very big related to the people that were participating in Paris. So many of us start to work and live there. So we decided to found the Research and Degrowth, because also many of us came from an activist-based experience. We were not only, let's say, young scholar, but also activists. For example, I was coming from Naples, and I have been activist for waste management, or better waste management here, against waste illegal trafficking, and other people coming were also activist based. So we decided to have this sort of NGO that could be able to communicate academia results, but at the same time be able to participate in social movement in that case in Barcelona. And we were lucky enough that when everything started in terms of research and degrowth, also, well, the Indignados movement started. We are not guilty. We are just participating in it. And indeed, out of the Indignados movement, so the Occupy experience of the place in all around Spain, but also mainly in Barcelona, we were able to also communicate and transfer some of the critics of economic growth through that movement during the crisis. So it was very important for us. Indeed, out of that movement, for example, in Spain, we know that emerged many parties like Podemos at national level, but also Barcelona en Comú in Barcelona, and now in Catalonia, that many of the claim that probably I will describe later on, because I think I'm around 4 minutes and 50 seconds, are passing through the political party too. And this is something that is very important for us. So degrowth, even if very often is perceived as, and as it is partially, an individual choice, what I want to stress with this very brief introduction, what Research and Degrowth try to do, is that there are many scales at which we want to intervene. That is not just at individual changing of lifestyle, but is also, of course, at social community organization, as well as at political level. So this is very important to understand that the way in which we think about the critique of growth is a way to politicize sustainability issue. So a way to politicize ecological claims. This is, I think, for now enough.
Okay, good. So Mladen Domazet is from Zagreb, and he's currently a research director at the Institute for Political Ecology, and he was also a scientific team coordinator of the DeGroat Conference in Budapest 2016. So, Mladen, you were actually one of the engines in organizing the DeGroat International Conference last year. So, and also in the same year, you managed to translate and publish the book in Croatian, the one book that I already mentioned, DeGroat and Vocabulary for a New Era. So, why maybe, I mean, conference was, the first one was already mentioned, but why are actually these DeGroat conference important? And why was maybe the last one significant for the region? Maybe we can start here.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Ida, for organizing this as well. In terms of conferences are important because you need to get people to meet in a larger space and all together across vast differences and projects that we regularly work on. They also have a performative role in showing to those who haven't heard of the idea or of the concepts or of the movement that something is happening rather than project meetings and separated things, although our own conference in Budapest started from a project meeting which was initiated here in Ljubljana by Lydia from Focus and then spread to partners in Ljubljana, Zagreb, Budapest, etc. The conference itself in Budapest, I think, was important in bringing degrowth as a term to start with, a word that did grow out of discussions in France and then Spain and Italy, so Western Europe, into Eastern European setting, especially as it was reaching out, the concept itself was thinking, okay, what other fertile grounds, what other sister concepts, ideas, historical movements exist elsewhere around the globe, including Eastern Europe. But to us it was also very important because Eastern Europe often sees itself as kind of waiting, hence the periphery or semi-periphery, as waiting in the wings to reach this transformation that Giacomo was talking about. You know, we're just not big enough, we're not rich enough, we're not even polluting enough, we're not that important. Let the ones who are doing the main business start doing something and we'll just follow when the time comes. And the research I do with the colleagues in Zagreb, and then I think there's more research like that in Europe, shows that that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, because Eastern Europe in particular, from a global perspective, does have a high level of development with a relatively smaller environmental impact, and there is something to learn from that. We have to find out much more why that is. There's all sorts of material and cultural reasons, historical, but it's worth thinking about that. And in that context, we wanted to bring the DeGroat community and therefore organize a conference here, which why I think it's important to have had it in Budapest. Budapest was a very good setting, unlike maybe Zagreb or Ljubljana, because it is a big metropolis. It is reasonably well connected by rail and other methods other than flying. It was really capable of hosting something like that. There is a big enough university, etc., etc. And I think it was an altogether a fantastic event of both academic and activist conferencing, and then also reaching out to the city, also just even enjoying, we like to say in the degrowth movement, conviviality, but we were actually enjoying parties among the community itself. It wasn't just work, and I hope that those who were there feel that that part was good enough as well. But in terms of a conference, it was important. Every conference is important to keep reopening the topics, because degrowth is not a canon. It's not a science in kind of, we have the truth, we have the right word, now go around and teach it around classrooms and universities. It's evolving. It's got many open questions still. I think some questions are coming to mid-level conclusions. It's not that everything's up in the air, but there's a lot of work to be done, and that's why conferences are a good place to do it. I think a secret wish as a scientific coordinator I also had was to have it as a regular decent and well done a scientific conference, so that it's not just sometimes derogatively perceived as a hippie activist movement, that people are not doing enough serious work behind. The conference, I think, shows that there are people doing the work. A lot of the record is there, both in writing online still. The videos from the conference are available, so you can judge for yourselves. But there were a lot of serious thought presented and debated there, and yeah, we had good 5 days, and I think Malmo and Mexico take the next torch in 2018 in the autumn.
But what about the book? I mean, I'm also mentioned that you published the book. So actually, you had challenges, as we had challenges here, how to translate actually the word DeGroat into Slavic languages. So maybe can you describe a bit this process of translating and how it is, I mean, why it's so important to translate it?
So when you start this book, degrowth is just the first challenge of about at least 15 up to 20 in the same linguistic terms. We wanted to translate the book because at about the time of the Leipzig conference, which was a very big conference, deliberately bigger than the Budapest one, the book came out, and it was obvious that this particular text, the way it was compiled with shorter chapters, covering terms which don't regularly appear in any particular single discipline, bringing them together, that this was the right type of text to introduce degrowth thinking and degrowth movement to audiences, and especially students and people reading in our Slavic languages. So we set off with that. Of course, first you have to find the right word for degrowth. This particular word I did actually hear at a meeting, a strategy meeting in Zelena Akcija, when people were throwing about various terms under which Zelena Akcija criticizes the development model, etc. They're not by any means, they weren't in 2012 committed to degrowth. But somebody said Od-rast as degrowth, and as we approach the work on the book, because of the particular nature that nerast has in Croatian language, that we couldn't use it, and I'm glad we didn't, because nerast would be exceptionally negative with the prefix ne or no. This Od-rast sort of sprang back to mind, and I think it works really, really well because it combines with the growing up, and I think that conveys a very good message of degrowth, that it's not a deliberate cutting off of your limbs or deliberate scaling down, but is maturing and simply stopping a fetishizing of expansion and growth. After you do the title book, then you got about, I say, at least 20 other terms which are new terms which appear in the disciplines and are collected in the English and other language versions of the book, which you have to find words for, from the word for degrowthers, i.e. people who do or think or practice or play degrowth, to words for neo-rurals and now-topians and stuff like that. And we had a very good translator, Mirta Jambrovic, who worked very hard on that, but we also had a broader team of people to consult on back and forth, for instance, on now-topians, should they be crossed into here-topians, because they're really about utopianism here and now, not just now, etc. And you play with it, you come up with something, and the book is here. And I think we have at least 2 copies, maybe, to give away if you're interested. And we use them in teaching practice, and I think they're quite a good success in terms of what you do with the materiality of a text. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madre, for now. So Lilian Pungas, you're actually from Estonia. Yeah. But you are now based in Zagreb, but also spent several years in Berlin, where you have become involved in the growth movement, or let's say movement or practices. So when we are thinking about practices and movement, actually, what is the degrowth that we are imagining? What is constructing a different society? What is actually your experience with the grassroots economic practices like urban gardening, maybe, or cooperatives, or eco-communities, or something like that?
I think I would talk about the German experience at the moment. Regarding the movement, DeGroat movements, I think like the ones you named at the moment, they are just a small part of them. They are the ones maybe that are trying to build a new alternative, a new kind of model of non-growth focused communities or lifestyle or economic practices. What is more to there is I think that I think German scene has also become really active in trying to kind of make a fusion or synthesis out of different movements that either oppose certain destructive environmental practices or support alternatives like eco-villages or community-supported agriculture or urban gardening and so on. So I have good experiences with that. There are plenty of this kind of practices, NGOs, foundations, communities, villages, like all kinds of different groups, initiatives, aiming for the kind of same goal, where the smallest common denominator is the criticism about GDP and the growth focus of politics and politicians. But I think the cool thing, or the really like inspiring thing about German scene, and not only German, but we're talking about German scene at the moment, is that they have managed to, with different conferences, like DeGroat Conference has been really helpful for these kind of things, have managed to make these different initiatives, groups, communities to recognize that they do have a same goal, that they sit on the same boat, even though one group maybe focuses on care and feminism and work sharing aspects, and the second one maybe on climate justice or is against lignite mining and organizing climate camps, or community-supported agriculture, urban gardening, commons, basic income initiatives, and so on. So I think the interesting thing in the last years has been to observe how they have kind of empowered each other, and also, for example, this is just an example, but I think it has been a pretty powerful example that throughout the climate camp and DeGroat Summer School in Germany, there has been a very beautiful fusion of activists and academics that both maybe used to have more, I'm not saying prejudices, but activists coming from a certain maybe leftist scene and maybe having to start like this image of them being anti-system and not having alternatives in mind, but rather being against everything, and then joined with the academics that rather have the image of flying back and forth from one conference to another one with their PowerPoint presentations, and seeing that how they too empower each other and kind of destroy the stereotypes and kind of go for the same goal has been a beautiful experience in Germany. This is what I wanted to say about Germany. I have a different opinion about Eastern Europe and German and Western European grassroots aspects. I think what has been interesting for me as an Estonian in Berlin was to see that, this sounds a bit maybe too critical, but to see how very many Germans, for example, travel to Ecuador, to South America, to Africa, to India, whatever, to find all these exotic, beautiful, inspiring examples like Buen Vivir and Ubuntu and all this community-based, valuing nature practices that go beyond the growth focus and materialistic values. And they have been very skeptical and not really willing to discover the East, although from Berlin to Poland is only 1 hour, so they prefer to write a master thesis about let's say Ecuador jungle community about Buen Vivir and fly back and forth and interview people and indigenous people there, instead of going to Poland or wherever, which country in Eastern Europe or in Balkan or wherever, to see what kind of practices are rooted here and contribute to the significantly lower footprint in many parts of the lifestyle. So that's been a bit.
But why do you think maybe the conviviality and the autonomy are kind of part of the movement, or are they part of the movement? And if they are they important?
I would say conviviality is a really big part of the movement. Autonomy, I would say it depends on like, you mean DeGroat movement in general? Yeah, yeah, they're both big. I think conviviality is exactly the example I brought. That I think it pays a lot of attention to not only what you go for together, but also how you go, well, how you aim, how you want to get to the goal. Basically saying that not only the goal is the way itself is a goal, it's as well, and that you can't achieve the same goal with going the wrong way, kind of. Um, um, I don't actually know what to add about conviviality itself. I mean, they have become, yeah, they are having increasing autonomy and they are paying a lot of attention to conviviality, but I wouldn't know now how to bring more
Yeah, no
exact
worries.
examples.
Mladen, would you like to add something? No?
Well, in terms of why conviviality and autonomy are important, it's precisely to have as an integral moment of degrowth thinking not the focus on less numbers and then less, but on actually transformation of how to have a good life with sustainable or better outcomes, but not a fetishizing of a drop rather than a rise again, you know. So we do try and always make it an integral part. Autonomy, precisely because you are a living people and you don't have to just be a tick in the system, just a cog in the wheel in the big machine. And conviviality because life has to be lived. You know, we're not doing it for someone else. Even when there's hard tasks to be done, maybe there's a nicer way to do them or better.
Okay, thanks for this intervention. So, Giacomo, we are back to you. So, when we are talking degrowth, we are also introducing a shift of perspective. So, this new perspective is also set by seeing a woman as autonomous subject. So, how does the feminist standpoint allow us deeper and broader insight into the economy?
Well, thanks for the difficult question. I will try to face this issue starting from the idea of conviviality. What really mean this concretely? No, because it's like very fancy, nice word that we use, but in very concrete terms, for example, just to coming back to the experience of indignado, of occupying, when some places were occupied, the first things that we built were kitchen. So the first worry of the people that were going in the square, staying together to speak about politics was, okay, we want to stay here, we will need to reproduce ourselves during these days. What we need place where we can piss and shit and place where we can eat. And basically this is this responsibility about the reproduction of you as a subject of conflict, a struggle, as a movement, is very, very important. It has been very new. If you look at historically the social movement struggle through Europe, but all around the world. So the aspect that, you know, the kitchen and the real basic needs are at the center of the new political envisioning and struggle against the system is what exactly in concrete terms means conviviality, okay? And how this related to, you know, women and feminism. This is exactly the point. I mean, normally all those activity that are the activity that allow us to be, you know, white, good man, proper worker are the invisible reproductive work that normally are done by women. So the fact that a social movement as Indignado start to take care as a collective about the reproduction and to think about who will take care of us as a political subject is very important. And this is why the feminism start to be a really central aspect of the emerging struggle that we have to going on to have in the next future. Because one aspect of, you know, degrowth is, of course, is first of all the critique of growth. Okay, this is very naive way of but very commonsensical way to speak about what we envision. And in very simple terms, what does it mean? It simply criticize this idea that the growth economy take with her in terms of ideologies, that in order to stay well, you need more. And in order to stay better, you need more and more. This is the basic, simple idea that we criticize. Okay? And on the other aspect, DeGroat is not only just a negative, a reversal ideology, but it's also a way to envision the society that we want. So let's say on a different plane terms, what is DeGroat about is how we, and this is why is very important. As normally there are right-wing DeGroaters, but basically we can see that most of the activists and practitioners are left-wing embedded, like traditionally, culturally, and politically. So normally, many of us know the famous book of Lenin, What Has to Be Done. No, it was always this kind of idea of what has to be done. You have an objective, you have to get there. It was also in, let's say, in productive mind. In order to get there, you need this strategy and so on and so forth. But what really is important nowadays is not only that we are able to answer to the question what has to be done in order to get what we want, but how we do it is very important. So how we do it is related to reproductive, to feminism, and the way in which we rearrange our relation of care. This is why, again, in plain terms, DeGroat will be an envision of the political arena that we can create, putting at the center the sustainability of life. So what is DeGroat about is the idea that we can discuss what is worth, okay, in terms of life to be sustained. What is the life that we have the joy and the courage to struggle together and sustained? Okay, this is what really means. So what is the sustainability of the life and the kind of relation that we want to reestablish between human, non-human, and our environment. In order to do that, how you do it, the reproductive aspect that has been the core critiques of not only the feminism in general, but also the radical critical feminism in the last 40 years becomes central in order to envision it.
But I also know that you are researching the need for basic income. How do you relate the idea of the need for basic income to the feminist economics?
Well, the topic of my research is not exactly basic income, but I start to be interested exactly from the perspective of feminism, because well, the basic income start to be like a policies that have many supporters. Okay, ideologically you can find liberal economists or liberal political scientists supporting it. You have center social democratic intellectuals supporting it. Then you have the radical and critical left. So I mean, many people. So this is problematic when many people that coming from very different ideology, they are supporting the same things. I think this is time that you take the position to define what you really means for you basic income. And this is why I start to reflect on it. So it's true that in some way I was relating this reflection to some empirical work that I was doing on paid and unpaid work, so the reproductive work that we do in order to maintain ourselves as an entity, as an individual, or as an household, family, society, and so on, comparing it to paid work, the productive aspect of it. So what worried me was that exactly, this variety of ideological background were trying to push for the same policies. So what was interesting to me is to clarify how the degrowth movement and the practitioner, the radical, let's say, critical ecologist could join this discussion. And so, first of all, the very important aspect that we want to underline, and really is a difference between all these kind of people that are taking position in order to discuss about the future of our monetary value circulation, is that we cannot and we shouldn't speak about basic income without speaking about a maximum income. So the ceiling income should be like a maximum income available for a subject in a country. This is very central. So first of all, if we speak about basic income, we should also be able to mobilize and try to discuss about what is the maximum income that we can in some way accept someone earn in a year in a country, let's say. This is very strange, and I admit that politically it's very complicated, because also the left, well, social democratic, some left party joined this idea of, the taxes are too much, we should pay less, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is very problematic in a moment in which nobody wants to pay taxes. So when you just say, you have to pay up to this level will be 100% of taxes, it's like crazy. But I think we have arguments to mobilize this concept. And I will start from a simple empirical data. In 1950s, there were many countries in which maximum income were part of the policies, and where these policies were enforced more were not, the Angola where Maoist struggler were fighting against the colonial countries, nor in real social democratic North European, but was in 1950 was in USA. And I don't know if you know who was the president that time in USA. Was Eisenhower, so was no a very nice person, was a general committed to the war, the first to speak about the military complex that allow a country to be imperialist and so on and so far. Eisenhower was a Republican, was a Democrat, and during that time, up to 250,000 dollars, you had 98% of taxation. So if you earn the $1 more of 250,000 euro, you pay 98% of this $1 more. This is very important, and the number don't say much now, because you should be able to, as an economist, to say, okay, the inflation, how much is it now? It's a lot of money. It's like around, now will be like around $2.5 million, yes. Well, indeed, who was paying that? We were paying, I think, 3 main manager and then 2 player of baseball. Of course, now in Spain will be like Messi, Ronaldo paying this kind of rate. But still, I think it's very important to discuss about the logic. So the fact that when is enough, and we discussed that this is enough. It could be like $3 million. I don't mind. Could be also 10 million. Like now we know, for example, in the football, the 100 million euro are like money for monopoly, when you normally use, and I now pay 200 million for this guy and this an African guy in Mbele playing in Barcelona and so on and so forth. So I mean, money is relative, but I think the logic of speaking about the minimum, speaking about there is enough in our society that we collectively decide that is enough, is the logic that we should introduce when we think about basic income. And just to end it, sorry if I expanded too much, the idea that then the basic income should be based not on an abstract, ideal, philosophical, right-based, human right-based policies. It should be based on this aspect, of very concrete reproductive activity that we do. I mean, also in industrialized country, the amount of work or activity that we do in order to reproduce ourselves, again, as individual, as household, community, society, that also is a very important aspect of our well-being that we experience above all when we are in crisis, is a huge amount of hour, normally are on the shoulder of women still, but I think on these real material aspects of what we do in order to stay well should be claimed the basic income. We do already a lot of activity to stay well, so the income is based on this really concrete material activity that we do in order to stay in a good relation, in good shape, in a good mood with our relative, with our collective communities, and then with our environment.
Thank you, Giacomo. So if we are again back to our region, Mladen, I know that you did some research recently on the ecological aspects of the social stratification. Actually, we're looking also into the Croatian case, but maybe can you illustrate and present some kind of findings or outcomes and how this thing actually relates to each other?
I could, but I don't have a presentation and I haven't got my papers with me. The social stratification, ecological aspects is undergoing research, and we haven't got data yet. We've only piloted the research, and it's in a stage where we're hoping to get interesting data into looking at whether something that is a class position defined according to 3 different schools of class theory is also reflected in the way you interact with the immediate environment you live with. I don't just mean the streams that you like, but how you get your food and where you get your shelter, and how protected are you from extremes of climate change, and how you would react to that, which networks you would rely on, etc. And as with all research, fingers crossed that interesting results come back rather than just null results or something. But in terms of broader research we've done, what we were particularly interested in was looking at deconstructing this prosperity hypothesis or affluence hypothesis, which says exactly this thing, that the environmentalism, especially in Europe, is driven by wealth, and the wealthier become more environmentalist oriented because they have more money to spend on it, and because this precious thing, the environment, becomes like a scarce commodity that they would be willing to pay for more, and then also sign up petitions and get involved and do civil society, etc. And then again, Eastern and Southeastern Europe increasingly looked like just somebody who's waiting to catch up, and then once they have a level of money and everything that goes with the money, like the impact and footprint, then they'll start caring more as well. And when we deconstructed the way these things were made through the questions you asked, through the assumptions you make, we realized that there's a lot of willingness to pay measures, and that when you take those out and look at general normative claims about the expectations of development and effects of growth, this difference between Eastern and Western Europe and between North and South disappears. And so most recently we've this summer fielded a survey on a nationally representative sample using precisely the battery of questions first developed by people at ICTA, by Vandenberg and Drews, and then we sort of worked it out some more with some new theory and also more appropriate to Eastern Europe, or rather Croatia in this case, because it's the first test case. And interesting results come out. I'll talk about them more in the seminar tomorrow, but there are large percentages of agreement, of expectations of the end of global growth, of almost massive fear of something termed global catastrophe. Like 90% of people are in agreement that things can't go on the way they are precisely for environmental reasons. And at least in this sample, the Croatian population comes out as highly supportive of this growth criticism, but then when you start putting strategies which either involve a cost or are related to more traditional green identity and environmentalism, then these things dissipate, and usually on statements like, do you agree that we worry too much about the future of the environment and not enough about current prices and jobs, then people start, especially as the crisis or even the austerity stagnation is continuing, more and more people are saying, yes, I mean, we need to focus, I need jobs now. And the only thing that our recent Croatian survey, and again, this is fresh results that I'm kind of cherry picking, that showed that support for growth was jobs. That there was a massive agreement, we need growth in order to get more jobs. Now, if you deconstruct that, if that isn't necessarily the case, where do our jobs come from, how many work hours we invest, in the same survey sample, a quarter of the population in the survey who are employed reported to be working up to 70 hours a week. Now, I'm pretty sure that those people don't necessarily want to work those 70 hours. 70 hours is a lot. So that's almost the double legal time. And so there could be, in that respect, more jobs for people. But yeah, more we'll keep looking and scratching at this kind of objective and survey data, etc. More on that tomorrow morning.
Okay, thanks. So Lilian, you were looking also the, let's say, trade-offs between the economy and the environment. So, for instance, on the one hand, we are having job creators, and on the other hand, we are having the environment that obviously is suffering because we have this economy that is growing, and economy that is growing also producing the dirty jobs, let's say that way, that are harming the environment. So what did you find out? Did you find something interesting? Is there anything that we don't know yet, or
I could comment on that, but my field work was rather actually on food self-provisioning in Eastern Europe. But from my experience about these dirty jobs, for example, in mining industry, for example in Germany, which obviously has better social security systems, which means when you become unemployed in Germany, this is not as traumatic as when you become unemployed in Estonia or wherever. I think the focus is a lot on the loss of the jobs, and often the number of the jobs that would disappear is not really significant. For example, in Eastern Germany, they made this study. There are many surveys about it. I think the jobs that would disappear when you cut the mining industry right away in Eastern Germany, not in Western Germany, there are many more there, is around 5,000 jobs, which is actually not a lot for an economy like Germany. And it is already also clear that most of these people working there are 5 years before retirement, so there are not many 30-year-old, let's say, people working in this industry and losing their future perspective in this mining companies. But instead, it's rather this unwillingness kind of to maybe embrace change, if I put it this way, and maybe also definitely unwillingness of politicians to kind of offer them the trade-offs, to say, for example, you get a new training in the sector of renewable energies, for example, or we pay you the retirement money already, although you haven't reached the age of 65. So I think these are the main fears of the people, which are really which are completely human and really normal. I think the problem is that it has evolved in this blame game, zero-sum game, that if you lose the jobs, they have nothing to do, but so you have to choose between two, which is, I think, where it has gone wrong from the very beginning. And the alternatives and kind of compensation measures seem to be they seem to be invisible or not communicated well enough, or the state is not maybe interested enough because politicians fear about the 5,000 jobs and the election votes and so on. But yeah, basically what Mladen did as well, the growth, like the jobs and unemployment is the biggest reason probably why people are so attached to growth. And other than that, as in Estonia and in Germany, they would still, also agree with the fact that growth can't go on forever. They kind of realize that it is, it's not a long-term perspective, and it can't really bring good either. But I think the inability of the politicians or of the industry to offer alternatives or offer compensation is kind of the problematic thing. And this is, I think, where I think foundations and NGOs and many civil actors maybe have to work more to make them more visible, to lose the fear in the people, or of the people that haven't informed themselves enough yet, but kind of seem to see it in the black and white way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I just want to say something about the correlation between growth, the economic growth, the GDP growth, and the increase of employment is practically not proved at all. It's like there is no specific correlation with the increasing in GDP and the increasing of employment in a country. It depends. It really depends the way in which your country, the economy of that country is made of. Of course, for example, if your country is based on extractive industry, Germany is not. Is really irrelevant in terms of the economy of Germany, the extraction. But if your country is based on mining, I mean, you mine more, but basically you really cannot do create so much job. All the extractive industry really are based on energy intensive kind of action, economic activity, and so they basically, if they expand, what they expand is the consumption of energy and emission for a country. They don't really produce an important number of new job. Indeed, for example, just to make example of in Italy, we have been between the G7 since the beginning, and I came from the south of Italy, and even if we always experience around 2%, so the magical number of GDP growth, if you put aside the last 10 days, we experienced this, but we had always 20% of unemployment in south of Italy. So, I mean, it really don't have a clear relation between these. In Spain, for example, the increase of Spain economy was related to basically to new investment in buildings. That is partially intensive in terms of creation of new jobs. So they were experiencing an increase in GDP and more job available in the country, but the GDP was, for example, related to the value of building sector was 25% of GDP, but they just increased in terms of job around 3%. So I mean, also the relation between the added value that this sector, that is, if you compare to an extractive sector, is relatively more important in terms of job creation. You don't really experience a proportional correlation between the added value increasing and the increase of available job.
So would it be fair to say that President Trump's promise of more jobs through more coal dug up on the American soil is not to be expected to materialize, or more coal will be dug up but not that many more jobs created?
Yeah, I think yes. For example, many of new jobs in terms of extraction in USA, they are really creating jobs because the extractive is very environmental impacting. If you think about fracking and you compare the fracking to the normal standard oil extraction, yes, you produce more job if you compare to the standard way of extraction, but still you don't really can have you cannot really achieve the number that you are promising. I mean, about promising job is not an invention of Trump. We are Berlusconi 10, 15 years ago doing that, promising every year 1 million job and so on and so forth. It never appeared. So Trump is just a new way of doing it. And I think this is, I mean, concretely, economically, it depends of the sector that you are speaking about, that you can create or not. So on this aspect, on many, for the fact that, for example, the energy sector is um, is very energy intensive, and then you have a sector that can be like added value intensive, like if you have in service sector, uh, for example, the job that you lose there is not because of the lack of growth. It is because of automation. It's basically that automation will cut the job specifically of the, it's strange to say, but will cut, first of all, the job of the very high profile manager that deal with financialization of the economy. It's good news, but they will lose the job before of us. Is that because the automation and the computing will be able to make their calculation faster and faster, and they don't really need, I mean, the capitalists, they don't really need people counting for, the future option and swap, because computing could be even more efficient. So the automation is the problem of also a growth economy. It's not about, the growth will guarantee it, because the automation that is coming will really cut a lot of jobs, starting from the top and going down. And this is why also the liberal economists are supporting basic income, because they know that even if in a growth economy you don't really can promise any job, but what you can do in order to have at least a base of new consumer, you have to guarantee a minimum income to the people that will lose the job. So this is why many liberal economists are supporting that. So the problem is automation. And in this aspect, if you think about that, when we as DeGroat are focusing on sustainability activity that are lower intense activity in terms of energy, but higher in terms of human activity, then even if you don't have economic growth, you can have a different kind of economy in which the jobs are increasing in terms of number, because of the intensive in terms of job and not in terms of energy, because we know that energy creates problem not only in terms of extraction, but also of the CO2 that we emit because of the increasing use of fossil fuel and carbon now.
Okay, I think we are coming to an end. If there are any questions or comments from the audience, now is actually the time for that. So, yeah.
It's okay, I guess, right? Okay. Yeah, right. Shit. Beside or beyond some individual practices or way of lives, what can be done on a governmental or parliamentary level, on a national or supranational state, that could help the degrowth movement? For anybody.
You want to start? On this aspect is very important. I mean, a part of the book that the book has 4 different sections. One section is about action. I'm very proud of this section because it's the largest section of the book, and there are the items in which we try to highlight what we can do at different scale and level. Then we also, as a research in DeGroat, and we also promoted 10 different policies that were really targeting Podemos party. In that moment, we were thinking, okay, there is a new emergent party that we know in Spain is based on social movements, so on and so far, so we can target this political party and, let's say, try to infiltrate in political economy discourses also our idea about economies. But it has been translated in 10 different languages and published in different journals. So I don't know if finally, I think the Croatia has not this appendix of the proposal, but probably Slovenian can have, because in the English there was not. So because this reflection on the political aspect came after, was very contingent to political election in Spain. And now we are very interested to the emergence of Catalan state. Anyway, Well, first of all, we were speaking about basic income and maximum income. This is a policy, it's a political economy that you should implement um, at any political level. You can do it at municipal level with very small part of taxation that you are in charge of, but then in terms of how your state is organized, you can have regional political economy related to taxations on also the state. So I think one is this, indeed in this decalogue was also one aspect. Another was about the cap of environmental activity. Another it was the shift of subsidies from, for example, one of the sector that is mostly subsidized by government all around Europe is energy sector. So I mean, and okay, the extraction of oil or the product. Normally, if you move this kind of subsidies toward sustainable activity, it's something that we are also promoting. Okay, if you move from these, for example, with same amount of money that you now that we in Italian, for example, use to finance incinerators, so just to burn waste. If we shift this to a different kind of energy, because in the Italian legislation there is waste are considered like renewable resources alike. So it's very interesting, but there are a lot of amount of money. For example, in the incinerator of Naples that I've been studying a lot, they took in 8 years 1 billion euro, 1 billion euro of subsidies. So if you shift the amount of subsidies toward, let's say, clean, green activity, will be another policies that we support. There are many of these. You can here you have, for example, job guarantee, the fact that government could be like the last resort supply of job for the women, men, and gay and lesbian that lose job, and so on and so forth. So there are many, and we have. I don't know if you want specifically discuss about something, we can do. But just to give you an idea of the variety of them is in this line. I think I want to say, what is your name? Sorry.
Well,
What is your name?
my name is Dan.
Dan. Okay.
Yeah. When there is a political proposition, is usually observed or watched through the prism of does or it does not influence economic growth, and in what way. So if the proposition influences economic growth in a negative way, it's going to be dismissed, and strongly. So how to break this discourse in the halls of the parliament, for example?
I'd say the first thing is you have to stop being disgusted and get political yourself. Like, they're not going to do it. The other is to start introducing the values, and sometimes that's why I advocate some quantitative counting and measuring. There are other things we can equally simply communicate and count that are not just growth, like availability of water or access to schooling or the length of schooling or access to health. These things are quantified nowadays and can be communicated in a simply as easy way as GDP is, as this number that goes up or down. So open up the topics, get political by forcing those who are either the new players in the arena or the existing players in the arena to comment on how does it affect access to health or access to education, say, or something like that. Shift the focus away from just what it does to growth. But it does mean kind of getting your hands dirty and having to actually kind of talk and play that game, which is not nice or easy.
Can I add something? Just to stay on, how you introduce. I mean, first of all, the idea that I was trying to transmit to you and to take home as a message, we as an activist based on research, so also number, empirical capacity of grounding our claim, we were really active in Indignato's movement, so we were part of a process that is really changing the political dynamics in Spain. For example, now in Catalonia there is a party, it's CUP party, that is okay, it's an anti-capitalist leftist party, assemblarian, organized around assemblies and so on and so forth. It is the party that was yesterday was perimetrized by the police of National Police of Spain police. For example, they just 2 weeks ago they had a question to the vice prime minister of Catalonia, saying, okay, in a new Catalan state, why we don't speak about, in terms of political economy, about degrowth and not growth? So, I mean, something can happen if you, together with other collective, are able to visibilize other possibilities, other policies, and other activity. Then, of course, it will not come in 1 year. The Indignato movement was back in 5-6 years ago, but then, you know, slowly you get there, because also, I mean, how you permeate the political arena is very complicated, no? And then it depends of the country where you are, the lucky contingency that help to you to make some arguments on and so forth. So you really cannot. The point is that you cannot have in your mind just what has to be done. I have to convince this political person that will influence and so on and so forth. It's not. It's how you do it, and the fact that you do it collectively, creating different activity of economy where you are based, will make the differences. This is why, for example, Barcelona now, with Barcelona in Comú Party, is make a really great difference, because it's based on, you know, a numerous of not only of occupying or, you know, uncivil, let's say, action, but also many economic activity based on cooperativism and ability to show that something different can be done. And then, when something different can be done, the politician can also push forward some policies, because they are grounded on activity that are already there. Because you cannot go, you know, for example, in the parliament, say, okay, I want to push social economy, solidarity economy, or fair trade inside my country, if there is not enough over there. Because it would be like, you know, you want to enforce something that doesn't exist. This is not possible. So we need to create this. In this case, the engagement is not just about, we have not to become all politicians. Well, we can do, but the fact that we have to be engaged. I mean, I'm referring to, you know, the people that are radical position as a radical position in terms of sustainability. We can act every day in a way that transform in different field the society that we live in, and then also someone of us will become politicians and probably will change and enforce different policies.
I wanted to add as well that there was in France, by France government, there was this Sen-Steglitz-Fitoussi commission, and in Germany it was like Enquête commission, and there was a big pressure from the side of civil society to actually, for the government to find out why they are focused on economic growth. Like, does it really justify itself? Is it profiting the population? Is it profiting the companies, the industry, the multinational trade companies where the taxes are not even paid in the country itself? And in Germany, I'm actually both. I think both reports, both were financed by the government. They both, I think, lasted a couple of years, and they both came to the conclusion that GDP or economic growth can definitely not be the only measure for the politicians to kind of aim for some well-being of the population, but that health, social well-being, social community, social capital, education, many aspects that actually contribute to the essential well-being of the population and the people or citizens are being really neglected by this measure, and that the government is actually, by the constitution, more or less obliged to actually address the report results within its politics. I think the problem is also that you have elections every 4 years, and it kind of sells better to, as a Trump say, I create million jobs, instead of saying I will promote policies maybe that make the GDP growth stagnate, because I don't know, I want to reduce advertisement, so you don't consume, you don't have artificial needs to consume everyday new things, so you maybe work less because you need less money and you rather spend time more with your family or whatever, or do engagement work where you also get other kind of satisfaction. I think it's harder to sell, and I think this is this long, short-term perspective in politics anyway, which is a structural problem itself, which is hard to break. But I want to say that I think there is a possibility by civil society and academia and so on to put increasing pressure on government or politicians to say, like, how do you justify that we only aim this GDP growth? Like, who does it profit? Can you show me the numbers? How has it kind of profited me? Because in Estonia, I think you said it's an European tiger, Slovenia. Estonia had before the financial crisis, I think 2007, even 10.5% of GDP growth, and it collapsed.
So don't scare the
It collapsed completely, and I know many people that really suffered hardly, and really, really painful kind of economic recession came in. And it's also about which kind of economic growth is the country going and aiming for. And if it's a financialized economic growth like it was in Estonia, built on credits and foreign direct investment, and kind of all the profits going out of the country and the growth kind of building itself on this artificial credit, then this is something that, yeah, has to be questioned, and that has to be also made clear for the population. Like, is it what kind of threats does it bring for the population, and who is it profiting in the long term?
Okay, because we are running a bit out of time, is there any other question, maybe, or comment? No? So then I'll just finish with this roundtable, and thank you all for coming, and see you later then.
Can I just say, for those of you who are here rather than on the streaming, if you want to read the book in Croatian, we have 2 copies, and we got 3 copies of another edition of the Institute for Political Ecology in English. That's one over there. So